Once in power, totalitarian movements establish not simply ideological reinforcement and indoctrination, but they create a system of terror. Obviously, ideology and terror, as I've said already, have to work together here. This terror is designed, obviously, to hold the population in place. And one sees this with the emergence in Germany of both the Gestapo and the SS. Two organizations which evolved separately initially, but then really came together. Moreover, the claim of the state is really to the total person. And I think that it's important to note that this is where the term really comes from. In an authoritarian state, if you do what you're told, if you obey the laws, if you, by and large, keep your nose clean, if you put the flag out on the Duce's birthday, I'm talking about Italy, and obviously in saying this, I'm indicating that I don't think Italy approached a totalitarian regime. If you do these things, your chances of getting by are relatively good. Totalitarian regimes, however, don't simply request or demand compliance with the law in an objective sense. A totalitarian regime attempts to control your private life as well. So the distinction between one's public and one's private life becomes blurred. It's difficult to see the difference. So the claim of the regime is really to the whole person. Now, the problem in saying this is there's a dichotomy when one looks at the theory of how totalitarianism works, and then looks at the way the system unfolded in Germany. The traditional image of Germany as opposed to the reality of how Germany evolved under Nazism. The traditional image is one of a highly centralized, very well-tuned system dominated by party ideologues who determined policy and then ensured that it was executed by sending orders down this well-oiled chain of command. Surprisingly, this is not the way things operated in Nazi Germany. As historians over the last 20 to 30 years have become increasingly conversant in the documents from Nazi Germany, a very different picture has emerged. Historians now tend to describe the regime as not so much highly structured, but as organized chaos, as institutional Darwinism. The coordination of totalitarian rigidity was done through really a very fluid organizational structure. Offices multiplied in Nazi Germany. Hitler never engaged in a purge of top officials after the Room Purge in late June of 1934 in a way that one sees under Stalin in the Soviet Union. Stalin, you seem to have this ongoing case of show trials and purges that took lives consistently. Instead, under Hitler, if somebody fell out of favor with him, if they failed to get the job done, they weren't fired. Rather, some ad hoc organization was created to do precisely the same tasks that that person was supposed to do. So what one found were competing jurisdictions. Very often several government agencies that were charged with absolutely the same tasks. So you had overlapping jurisdiction and really organizational chaos. Now, the question often comes up, was this a conscious plan by Hitler, largely to control the situation and maybe maximize his own ultimate authority, or was this his own personal style? Most historians believe that these decision-making tendencies on Hitler's part were much more his style than they were a conscious plan. And though I'll point that out, I have a tendency to say that you need to combine the two. That there's a conscious element involved here, but it is also his style. Until the death of Paul von Hindenburg, who was president, who appointed Hitler as chancellor, he dies in early August of 1934, Hitler held regular cabinet meetings. He made an effort to be at the Reich Chancellery every morning. He held regular appointments with various state officials. He signed documents. This was a man who hated to put his hand on paper with a pen at any time. He didn't like signing documents. After Hindenburg's death, cabinet meetings became far more rare, and in fact, the cabinet never met again after 1938. That's less than halfway through the total history of the Third Reich. Ministers of government were forbidden to meet collectively, informally, and so they were forced to submit legislation to the secretary of the Reich Chancellery, a fellow by the name of Hans Lammers. Lammers read everything, and he determined what Hitler would see and what he didn't see. Only when all issues were resolved, and this is from Hitler's perspective here, and some sort of consensus was achieved in terms of these documents that are coming in on his desk, was business actually taken to Hitler. The same procedure was true with the Nazi Party. You have to see Nazi Germany as being kind of a two-headed hydra here, where you have the traditional government, but you also have the party structure, and they're in competition with each other. In the party structure, you have a hierarchy in which, although the Reichsleiter were at the top, the Gauleiter, these regional chiefdoms, were probably the most important officials down the hierarchy from Hitler. The Gauleiters were forbidden to meet collectively outside of Hitler's presence. And Hitler refused to meet them on any issue unless they were in agreement. Unanimity is something that he craved from them. He didn't want to be put in a position where he had to choose one lieutenant over another, which is a very bizarre thing when one thinks of the total power that existed in this person. So the Gauleiter met with Hitler only when all of the problems resolved themselves. So what you find then is, in this instance, Rudolf Hess, as opposed to Hans Lammers, is the gatekeeper to Hitler, at least until May of 1941, when he commandeers an airplane and flies to Scotland, thinking he's doing Hitler's will. And at that point, his position is taken over as Secretary of the Party by Martin Bormann. Hence, what you find then is there's no real hierarchy of organization. The key to success was access to Hitler. And access meant getting through Lammers at the Chancellery, or it meant getting through either Rudolf Hess or Martin Bormann when it came to the party offices. There's film footage at Obersalzberg. This was Hitler's retreat down in Bavaria, which I think accurately portrays Hitler's retinue struggling to get access to Hitler, struggling to get his ear. This was one of the great opportunities one had if one were invited to go down to Obersalzberg. After August of 1934, Hitler rarely showed up at his office. It was very difficult to find out where he was going to be at all. And while making Hitler the final arbiter in all sorts of issues, this was very full of pitfalls. He didn't like to be burdened with bureaucratic duties. He moved from place to place. Hitler despised Berlin. He hated Berlin. He never forgave the capital for having voted so heavily for the Social Democrats and the Communists, even after he had become Chancellor and even after the Communist Party had been made illegal. So he spent a great deal of his time in the Alps at his home there or at party headquarters, which happened to be in Munich. And he kept increasingly idiosyncratic hours. He often began his day quite late, 11 o'clock in the morning. He tended to work for about an hour, seeing various people. He then would lunch from 12 to 2, or brunch, I guess you would say. He napped in the afternoon. He carried on business late in the afternoon for 1 to 2 hours, ate his evening meal, and then he would tend to entertain old cronies from what was called the Kampfzeit, Alte Kämpfer, people who had been with Hitler since before he was Chancellor. And they often adjourned, and this was particularly true in the Obersalzberg Salzburg to a projection room where they started watching movies around midnight and would watch until 2 or 3 in the morning. They enjoyed, by the way, Hitler very much enjoyed Hollywood entertainment movies. He scoffed at America on any number of occasions, but the films he liked were the ones that came out of Hollywood. When I mentioned this to my students, they loved the idea of starting the day at 11 o'clock and wish they could find a job like this. Governing, nonetheless, is quite difficult for Hitler. With Hitler, he was an extremely hard man to see. And as Lammers and Hess discovered, he had a tendency to say yes to everybody who came to him. So the task would be to get in to see Hitler and very quickly to spout forth whatever it was that you planned on doing. And Hitler had a tendency to say yes, 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 ja, ja, jawohl to virtually everything, unless there was something that really was a sticking issue that he said absolutely not to. But that tended not to be the case. And so you would go back to your region of responsibility and say that you were operating on a Führer order. Hitler rarely gave written commands, especially after 1934. And I think this is very, very important when you try to find a paper trail leading to the final solution. There was this, I guess in hindsight you'd have to say, a ludicrous notion about 30 years ago that Hitler had kept a diary. The man didn't like to write things down.